The locative situation or the issue of place in the context of one of Heidegger's taking over of or Entwicklungsfähigkeit or a capacity to be developed mining of a revelation of Nietzsche's, which happens to be, it seems to me, a specific application of Nietzsche's overall notion of the paradox of the statement, there is no truth, which he always is binding himself to. But in this case, what Heidegger was fascinated by and used ever after his 4-volume Nietzsche work as a statement der Mensch ist das noch nicht festgestellte Tier. Man is the not firmly set in place or defined animal. Man is the not firmly defined animal. And I find it very interesting that this is so proximate to the concept of Gestell, because it's saying the first part of the word, festgestellte, is like our English word fast in this statement, the sailor statement, hold fast. It's like, there's a storm, you're on deck, hold fast. So this is given as firmly defined, fast, holding fast to the definition, festgestellte. But now the Gestell, so the Gestell, which is sort of a hat rack is a kind of Gestell, but the periodic table is also a kind of Gestell. Sets things in place and orders them. But the Gestell, the way Heidegger uses it, we have a sort of specific Catholic interpretation of it from Thomas Sheehan, although basically what he's saying is, I'm acting in my capacity as a Heideggerist, as it were, in the proper sense. I mean, a Heidegger scholar in the proper sense. And then he's saying within Gestell is already this the language of morphe or shape, and that it should be translated as exploitation for use. I think that's the exact phrase. Maybe I've miswritten it slightly. Exploitable for use. Exploitable for use. Okay. Makes more sense. I couldn't read my own handwriting. Now let's test for just 1 second. Is it totally superficial to connect exploitable for use to sort of one of Nietzsche's leading ideas of life is exploitation? It sort of fits. I mean, I'm not saying that Sheehan meant to signal that. I'm not saying anyone meant to put it down that way, but it does fit the case, as it were. man. So let's say it again. Der Mensch, or humankind. The idea is that if you're an alien, and you come walking down the street, and then you see a man, and then you also see women and children, then the idea is you're going to say, that's what this planet's race is at its that's what this planet's race really is. So because the man is supposed to be the sort of the full expression of the race. So a word like der Mensch, which we could translate as, it's just like mankind, right? We have that word in English too. That's the idea behind it. That the man is the real full expression of the race. It is interesting because you'd want to say, well, isn't that natural because of the at least if for no other reason, for the same reason that we have all these troubles about Title IX or whatever, with respect to sports, or the problem of the separate but equal with respect to sports. But it's funnily enough, just so it's on the side, funnily enough, people are all of a sudden very willing to recognize that separate but equal actually totally makes sense when it comes to women's basketball, men's basketball. Of course, there's always a lot of, except in Berkeley High, I think we had the women's basketball team was much stronger than the men's basketball team, actually. But of course, it's relative to the league they're in and all that stuff. Or it was much more hyped somehow, it was much more important, and then they actually got more consideration than did the men's team, but that's a rarity. But in any case, this type of question has gone into this sort of the grinder of all these new questions of the transhumanism and so on. But okay, let's dial back into what we were actually talking about. Mankind. I was just trying to sort of say, it's funny because we, as it were, a specific Western civilization have that idea, but then you could see in Gambuta's, for instance, Maria Gambuta's, in the early European civilizations, the matrilineal civilizations, and also the Egyptians, so far as I can tell, were sort of more of a they had the idea, something more like yin yang or something like that, but expressed totally differently. But I'm just saying something where the male and the female principle were somehow compensatory, rather than the one was the more mature or adult version of the other. So you do see these principles come into conflict when you think about it in terms of the other definitions, as it were. Suppose each one of these is regarded then as a definition in the sense of Nietzsche. Nietzsche says so. I think this brings us in more to the inverted dark moment. Okay, so because then you see this question of the defining of the human being can take it the expression of culture, in the sense that Egyptians are, you could either say of high civilizations, as Spengler or some of these other people would, or as culture, and then these different Gestell, these different ways of binding, such as the cannibalistic way of being. But maybe, it depends on how we want to do it. Maybe it's more interesting to do it Hegel and Spengler's way and think only in terms of the high cultures rather than in the present day way of doing it, which just speaks of difference. All cultures are different. Some are so-called pre-literate, but they're just different. That leads more towards I don't know. I almost want to say a priest, the way you see priests in those French movies on the Fanny trilogy or something like that. This sort of mocking version of what a priest is. A priest is a sort of air-headed idiot. But nonetheless, it could be defended. I mean, obviously, I just don't like that tone of defending it. There's ways of defending it that, if you had a gory version, maybe it would be more appealing. But in any case, so you have the cultures and the notion of cultural different. And now say each culture is a Gestell onto the Dasein of that culture. But then what's Heidegger saying? He's saying the technological essence is raging over the earth and all its people, and then there's this increasing sort of Fremde thing with the total synthesis of nearness and remoteness, because the scientific view of things is alien to common sense, because it says the earth is moving at an extreme rate. It says nothing that we see is real. It says the subatomic level tells us more about what we actually are than does the folk tales we tell in daily life about what's happened during the day. And at the very least, that A.J. Ayer version, that presentation in terms of chemical substance is scientific, but the facts according to a normal sort of legal account or an everyday account, this person was crying, for instance, are interpretation. Because you should have said that there's some salinated substance of a certain kind coming out of those ducts or whatever. If you want it to be real, as it were. And not just tell a story. So each of these a Gestell, so that in the second cave, the cave of history, it's not only that there's, you see there's all the caves of the all the other Dasein, which are very numerous in number, cannibal metaphysics, and so on. The way of life of post-Castro Cuba or whatever, which apparently Trump is sort of gnawing at the bit to do another one of his sort of stealthy action hits, where basically, apparently the idea is, because I got this from Matthew Kronig, the Atlantic Council guy, said in Venezuela, the idea is that now you keep everything in place. You don't. It's presented as an evolution on the theory of what happened to the neocons in Iraq and in Libya. I don't know. You don't usually call Obama a neocon, but what's it's sort of like people who listen to the men in suits, as Putin put it. And then, no matter what they were professing was their politics, they carried out these adventures in Libya, in Syria, People don't believe that Obama was behind Syria, but you look up the wiki article on Operation Timber Sycamore. I mean, it's not something hidden. It's just that the current sort of most popular way of thinking about it isn't privy to all these other things that are totally in public information. Because nobody has time to study, to know all these things. It's too much. It's too much is constantly flowing before us. It's that's a Nietzschean problem too. How to trim back. So you have all these Gestell or caves or Dasein, but there's one that stands out all of a sudden, this Galilean, and Dugan has to respond to it as much as anyone else. This sort of Galilean, Cartesian, Spinozist, Aufklärung, Dasein, right? Which, by the way, I mean, if you think about it, sort of Walpurgis knocked or whatever, this, if you just follow Arendt, very simply, it's like you can't have totalitarianism, and you can't have the so-called banality of evil, except under these conditions, except under these same conditions which allow for the industrialized production of the camps and so on, because these conditions breed something that didn't exist for the worst Nero or whoever in former times, because they did Tiberius or whatever. They didn't have Sejanus, these type of proficiencies, if you like. But here's the interesting thing. These proficiencies, usually we would say of a culture, like they have a certain type of way of building. We would call it architecture, but the Chinese say we never had architecture before. Wang Shu, for instance, I heard this from. We never had architecture. We only had building in China until the Europeans started hoisting this architecture on us. But now we're doing architecture, okay. But you have a certain proficiency of a certain locality. So say the sort of type pagodas and stuff, the things that we linked to traditional Chinese building style, whatever it is, or Japanese building style, or Egyptian, whatever it is, Samarkand's way of building mosques or whatever. But instead we're talking about the sciences and the proficiencies of the sciences, and then the claim is the sciences have materially and conceptually gone everywhere, so that now really the proficiencies or the kind of way of producing artifacts of one culture, the so-called Western culture, has gone all around the world. So in this sense, the Western culture is the ultimate culture. This is what is behind Spengler's version. Sort of an update of Hegel, basically. This Faustian culture, so-called, as he calls it, the infinity drive culture, almost the romantic culture, nach Unendlichkeit, Trieb nach Unendlichkeit culture. It does, at least materially, become the locative power, become the place power, and the power that decides the character of the place rather than the personality of the person. And then, yeah, it's interesting. This is what I was trying to get at, I think, like maybe 2 videos ago. We have here the question of locating the Gestell and locating the technological essence, and it seems to come in this sense of being dunamis or being energia type analysis, where we're talking about here's this proficiency, here's this power, here's this strength, here's this muscle you can flex, and it has this certain character. We call it a Gestell. It's defined in a certain way. But then the question is, why is it we're seeing everything through this pattern of thinking? Could we shift our thinking a little bit so that we don't continuously force ourselves to say the human being is that creature that doesn't hold fast to its proficiencies and to its material culture, which is mirrored in its conceptual culture. So clearly the material and the concept can drift a little bit, and that's where you get a lot of confusion and so-called quote-unquote debates in the sphere of the I don't know, sort of the sphere that's noising but not. Doesn't it have to manifest itself in some given particular thinkers? Because what difference does it make if it supposedly vouchsafes for? Well, I guess it does make a difference. It also affects all these things. I was just going to say that certain candidates are. I mean, this is also one of the arguments on the Maduro thing. Is like that supposedly he had cheated into elections, and that the polls were known to have gone against him twice. So it's a very different. So according to this logic, it's very different than with Putin, who, even if the elections are somehow rigged, nonetheless people believe that the majority of Russians support him as leader. We have this Gestell as proficiencies, as one of the deeper proficiencies would be a certain culture which is at the core of the so-called universal culture. This is what Hegel's arguing also, but he's arguing it, in other words, Hegel's saying the Prussians of my age are superior, or at the absolute moment, but only because it actually is better to have formal equality under the laws. It actually is better to have to dissolve the legal system based on the estates, etc., etc. It actually is better to develop the system of so-called Recht, or right, that Hegel presents as the pinnacle of all of this development. And therefore it implies a certain kind of Aufklärung or enlightened thing should spread everywhere, as Fukuyama tried to make it spread everywhere. Fukuyama pays very little attention to the metaphysics of the sciences, but I think that they come to their core in this type of question. If you go back to the beginning of this video, this Nietzschean statement, and the way Nietzsche states it, and then connecting it to Now we can connect it also. Let me just end with the one sort of attempt to change it, show where we could try to think about it differently. Is just think about any department of science, like chemistry, for instance. So in chemistry, obviously, we'd have the example of asking, what does it really mean, the distinction between chemistry and the art of those who are looking for the philosopher's stone or whatever, the art of that came before chemistry, which is now put down somehow as superstition, as alchemical studies. And then the standard problem of when are you no longer doing science according to the sort of, like I was mentioning, I like the Kafka story here to show how these departments operate, but it's just as true. And if you look at a book, like for instance, like that Cossack Chang writes on is H2O water, something like that, or is the stuff about combustion versus oxygen versus phlogiston, is that really as solid as it appears? And then you see it's really more like one, there's the material things happening, and then there's on the other side the ontological commitments, and they put everything in the mirror, in each other's mirrors, and that deranges things, because you could talk about all these things in terms of phlogiston theory or in terms of oxygen theory, for instance, and it's as long as you're consistent with it, it's rational, it makes sense, even if the word phlogiston sounds absurd in our own time. You could bring it back again, possibly. It could change. But the point of Kafka in his story, usually called Fellowship, or Gemeinschaft, it says prolonged discussions with these outsiders. So somebody has the other theory. Prolonged discussion with them would amount to making them part of our Gestell, making them part of our dunamis, or our energia. There becomes a question also here linked very closely to Heidegger's examination of the air gun. I think that's the other thing you could superimpose over this question of Nietzsche saying the human being is defined or sort of gestelled by its lack of any holding fast to a ship of state or some kind of great wheel in the night sky.